All right, the Hangout is live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking About Survivor. I am Christiana Ellis.
And I'm Mike Mateen.
And tonight we're talking about Survivor David versus Goliath. Whoops, getting an echo of myself. David versus Goliath, episode 3. Now, what did you think of this episode? I think, the first one was weird. The second one was a little, what about this one?
This one felt more standard. The edit was a little cleaner at the pre-challenge. So that it was like, here's some interesting things over here, and here's some interesting things over here. Let's see which one we're going to approach. So pretty standard with that. The only part that was a little off but is not unprecedented was that it kind of went to tribal council abruptly. We're still sort of in the middle of the day talking about everything. And again, you go back and look, and it's like, well, all that probably happened after that was like building of consensus, since they all agreed. So we don't need to see that. Or
I think that is definitely what happened, is that if we had watched any more conversations after that, we would have realized that everyone except Jeremy got on the same page.
Right.
So, which I will just briefly say, we've talked about Natalie before, but I'm kind of feeling like, what are you guys doing? Why was this the right decision? This seems dumb to me. And then on top of that, Jeremy was apparently so blindsided that he didn't use his idol. So he got voted out on episode 3 with an idol in his pocket. But then again, it's like, I only was suspicious that might happen just because it seemed like the edit was making it super obvious that it would be Natalie, which, raises the sort of red flags of like, wait, are they setting us up here for a reversal? Sure enough, they were. But I guess I just feel like I don't see it. I think it was the wrong decision by pretty much any metric. And I'm kind of flabbergasted that they were able to convince everyone to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it probably came down to the ones who were adamant against it, because everybody was being fairly transparent outside of Jeremy and Natalie.
Yeah.
Realized that their other group was adamant for it. So, and there weren't enough of them. So it's like, at what point do you just do it out of principle? Like, what does that prove? Like, we might as well just be a consensus as a tribe and move forward.
Yeah.
And you kind of like flashing back to, I can't remember her name, the one girl who was like the most adamant against going with Jeremy.
I believe that was Gab. Wait, no, not. Angelina.
Angelina.
Yeah. I was wanting to say Gabriella. I wasn't confusing with Gabby, but I knew it was Angelina. That was pushing for it the most. And it seemed, at least when we left off, like everyone else was kind of not buying it, and she was kind of mostly on her own.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. I was talking about the girl that, when she approached her with that, was like adamant, like, no, it has to be Natalie.
Oh.
Yeah,
okay.
Natalia.
Yeah. I mean, so Natalia and Allison both, in their confessionals at least, seemed like they thought it should be Natalie.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, then going back and looking back after they built the consensus that it was going to be Jeremy, when you think back to tribal council, like a lot of Natalia's like facial expressions like make a lot more sense, because she's like super frustrated that she needs to be voting against Jeremy and let Natalie stick around, even though she 100% agrees with all of Jeremy's reasoning.
Yeah. So you might be right. It might have just been in order to keep the peace. They're saying, look, I think we're all on a consensus that we want both of them gone at some point. And if she's really going to make a big thing about it, then fine, we'll just do it in the order she wants, I guess.
Right. Well, it just wasn't enough of them once they had, because John was totally on, like, John probably wouldn't have pushed for it the way Angelina did, but John was definitely okay with it. Like, we got that from the pre-challenge edit where he's like, I kind of want to sit around and have Natalie. I think I could work with her. I think she could, like,
we could get her through the next couple of tribals.
Yeah, then I think she could be a good, like, going into the merge, then all of a sudden, because what he's thinking is if we can get her to the merge, then her inability to perform in challenges becomes an asset to her sticking around. But she is correct in that she is going to be highly unlikely to win because she's super unpopular and super bossy. Yeah. So he's like, this is exactly the kind of person you want on your side in a merge, because she'll take all of the heat, but no one will get rid of her because...
Well, yeah, but the biggest argument, honestly, to my mind, even beyond just everybody not liking her very much, was the idea that there's got to be a mix-up coming, and she's just going to go around and talk crap about all of us to the people who don't know anything yet.
Right,
and it seems super obvious to me that that's exactly what she's going to do.
But see, that's where I'm saying why John is open to it, is because he has befriended her. So he is not going to be in that talking crap part of it.
Yeah.
So he's sort of thinking like, I don't care if she goes and does that, because she's not going to say that stuff about me.
I guess, but
I'm not saying he's right. I'm saying that's what he established in the pre.
I guess where I'm just coming down is they could tell me anything they want about what their reasoning was, and I will still think it was a dumb move. And the only thing that might persuade me that it was not a dumb move is if it was really like you're suggesting, which is to say, someone that they do want to stick around is making a big fuss about doing Jeremy first and Natalie second. And if they want to keep the peace with that person, they're willing to do it in that order. That's the only thing that can justify it to me.
I think exactly how it came down. And so, like, the way that it was set up, like, we see John saying, basically, I'm not going to fight for Natalie. This is all pre-challenge. I'm not going to fight for Natalie, but I'd like to keep her around because I think, again, we're friends, so she's not going to badmouth me in the tribe mix-up. I think that it would be great to have her after the merge, because once we go to individual immunity challenges, like, or once we, again, once there's not a team thing of keeping the team strong, she becomes like just nobody's going to care. I think to your point, I think he was wrong, because I think but her attitude is probably still going to get her voted out at some point earlier.
Yeah.
Even if people don't see her as a threat to win, they're going to say, you know what, we've just had enough of her.
She's just a pill.
Right. And so I agree with you that this was the wrong decision, but I was saying John has in his mind that. And then for whatever reason, like, Angelina's is a little harder to understand. Like, this, it was basically like she disliked Jeremy more and thought he was sketchy. So she was like, well, Natalie we need to get rid of next, so let's just do Jeremy now. And John was kind of like, I mean, I'm cool with that because it keeps Natalie around. And that momentum kind of got everybody else to be like, well, shit, Angelina's not going to let this go. And now she's got John, and she's got, I think Alec, I don't remember who all, but eventually she stacked up enough, or Kara, stacked up enough people. And with Kara came Dan, so now all of a sudden, like, how is Allison going to argue against that? How is Natalia going to argue against that? As they just sort of, they took the people who were kind of like, I don't like either of them because he's kind of sketchy and she sucks. But if you feel passionately, I'll go your way, to the people who were like, no, she sucks that bad, we have to go. And they ended up being outnumbered and just had to go along, because otherwise, like, otherwise they're just making a point.
And I think that's probably what happened. And it's just, it's an example of the type of episode that frustrates me a little bit, because in the interest of trying to produce a surprise in the outcome, they essentially just don't show us what happened.
Right.
So we don't know how they came to that decision because they just didn't show it, because if they did show it, then we would guess who it was going to be.
Right. And that's why I said, like, that was the only thing with the, with the editing part of it that felt a little off, but not unprecedented, was the fact that they just had to cut all that stuff out, because otherwise it would give it away. So,
right. So as much as I feel like it was a clearly bad move for them to keep Natalie in favor of voting out Jeremy, Jeremy himself didn't do himself any favors in this episode. No, he was definitely acting sketchy.
Right, and that's what got the fringe people, because that's where, like, somebody like Mike is like, you even see him back to pre-challenge, and that, I think some of that's important, because it takes it gives you some context as to how Angelina was able to whip this up, and those were actually her words, like, I'm going to whip the votes.
Yeah.
Because she knew it was not the popular position, but she knew there was just enough there that she could get it done. And somebody like Mike is a great example, because he's walking around and saying, like I like Jeremy, but he's super sketchy. Like,
he's his own worst enemy. He said that like a couple of times. And he said a lot of that before they had even lost. He was like, I got to kind of distance myself from him. I want to be, Yeah. And then, pre-challenge, he earned an ugh from me in my notes. That was the bit where he decides to call everyone together and have a conversation about how they're having too many strategy side conversations. And I'm just going, dude, what are you doing? What are you doing right now?
Right. And this was, I thought, or just a really solid edit on their part. So they go through that. And then they cut right to him, like, pulling people aside and talking about who he thinks who they think he should vote for, and doing all this kind of stuff, like basically doing that. So all it boiled down to is everybody understood what that meeting was. It was like, you guys are having too many side conversations that don't include me. Not the fact that you're having them. Yeah. It's not that. It's that I'm not in them. And to a lot of their points, like, Kara's even saying, like, I haven't even really been talking strategy. Like, I've been having side conversations with Dan,
getting to know people. And even Mike, who seemed like Jeremy's biggest advocate, if even a qualified one, was kind of saying Jeremy himself is the one who most needs to listen to his own speech, because he's the one that is doing what he's complaining about more than anybody else.
Right. Yeah. And I think I would echo what Mike said when it comes to Jeremy lecturing Natalie on self-awareness.
Yeah, that's true too. And it puts that whole conversation in the looking back with hindsight, it puts that a little bit of a different spin on that, because as much as I think his assessment of her is correct, perhaps his approach was not the one most likely to produce a good outcome rather than a defensive outcome. Right. And so, his whole thing of like, oh, I'm just going to tell you to your face exactly what's going on. But he also basically phrased it as an attack, with the context being everybody hates you, but I'm going to help. Which you can imagine why, what is the positive reaction to that? That said, I don't think he was wrong about what he was saying. It's more just a matter of tone, right? But, I think it might just be that what we have been shown of the way he was acting, maybe it was just even more extreme. Like, they didn't have to cherry pick because he just was like that all the time, maybe.
I feel that way. I mean, the fact that, I don't think that they change the timeline, and the fact that, like, he had this whole big speech of, like, not having side conversations, and then I don't want to say it was immediate, but post having that conversation, he then goes and does all of that. Yeah. And that's why I said, like, him lecturing her about self-awareness, like, again, like Mike said, like, take your own advice. You have no idea, like, you don't realize, you just basically sat down and said, don't have side conversations without me. Yeah. Don't have side conversations. Like, everybody thought through that. It wasn't veiled. And then for him to go and like badger her, and it just and he just I wish he had acted differently, because I like a lot of the things about him.
Mm-hmm.
My actual preference, what I was thinking when I was kind of what I wanted to happen in this episode, I was rooting for him to be voted out, but use his idol.
Oh, and have Natalie go.
And have Natalie go, and have him have a reckoning of how he was behaving, that then allowed him to kind of be humbled and go back to, because yes, he understands what's going on. He's smart. He can argue really good when, really well when he needs to. He was picking the wrong times and the wrong tones.
Yeah, and see, I could also almost imagine in my head that part of what was going on is he had such a bee in his bonnet about Natalie that he was just wound up about that, and that maybe with her gone he would calm down a little bit. Maybe, I don't know, but I could at least imagine that being true. Whereas we saw Natalie acting the way she was acting long before he approached her.
Right.
So I don't think it would go the other way. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think just, we've kind of talked about that strategically. I think even if you're going to a mix-up, Natalie is not an asset really to any dynamic. So, and she is unpleasant to be around and seems highly likely to cause complications and spread information that you don't want spread in the event of a mix-up. So there's basically, as far as I can tell, no upside to keeping her. Now, okay, maybe Jeremy, like maybe you feel like he's sketchy and he's going to be not long for the game, but he's at least more capable. Like, he can do things, and so I don't know that said, it was kind of a frustrating position to find myself there at the end, because it's kind of like, okay, Jeremy, I'm really trying to be on your side here, but man, especially like in the tribal council, by the time the tribal council came around, he was making her look like the reasonable one but just between the two of them, like, I don't have a problem with her, but let me spend the next 45 seconds ranting about how awful she is. And everyone else just kind of sitting there going, And so, if he was acting like that at camp, then I get it.
Right. And that particular moment really, or not, sort of that interaction gives us a little bit of insight into, how Natalie is. Like, all we've seen before is she's kind of bossy, because she's used to being able to just boss people around.
Yeah.
And you probably sit there and people wonder, like, oh, well, how did she get to the point of being able to beat? Well, she held her cool, under attack like that. And like you said, repositioned it where she looked like the reasonable one.
Yeah.
And you get, like I said, you get that insight into, you could see her in a professional setting where if she's being bossy and someone gets wound up about it, she almost can flip the tables on them and be like, well, I'm the reasonable one. You're the one. Like, I don't understand why you're so upset.
Yeah. Although, like, what I read from her, just like my gut reaction to that stuff is it puts me on the Jeremy side of the equation, because occasionally I've had conflict with people who are like that, where when they're mad, they just shut down and go cool and blank like that. Right. But it does not mean that they won't be totally hostile and passive aggressive about it. It just means they don't yell. And by staying cool like that, but immovable and unreasonable, it forces their opponent to sound crazy when you argue with them. And that is frustrating to me. I've been on the other side of that, on the Jeremy side of that, and it's very unpleasant.
Yeah.
And so I get it, but I also can see what that looks like from the outside. But it's also true during the tribal council, when after that rant, when she's kind of just like, look, I'm very open to constructive criticism. If other people feel the same way, they should say so. And then 3 people say so. They all kind of chime in of like, well, he has a point.
Right.
So we know that it wasn't just Jeremy having that reaction. But it wasn't just Jeremy that was annoyed by it. He was the one that was getting all wound up about it. And I can imagine too, from his perspective, part of that is because he sincerely, whether he was like good at it or not, he intended, we know from his confessional, he wanted to try to help her, and she basically shut him down and rebuffed him. And then came back to him later and said, I feel like I've never had your support. And I could imagine him just reacting to that, just like, I could just becoming kind of like incoherently angry about that. I get that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, so I'm not really very happy to have Natalie still around. I hope that, we have seen in the past sometimes that when 2 players have a specific personality conflict, sometimes when one of them goes, the other one chills out.
But I agreed with you, is that I thought the more likely one of the pair to have that happen would have been Jeremy.
Yeah.
Like, Natalie leaving would have made Jeremy chill out. Natalie didn't have a particular problem with Jeremy. Other than like Natalie had a problem with everyone.
Yeah.
Jeremy just created his own problem. So I don't think, but back up to, I guess, what I said earlier about maybe, hoping that Jeremy would be voted out, but use the idol and then humble himself. Maybe the fact that maybe Natalie will realize how on the rocks she was and address some of these negative bossy things she was doing, especially since people who voted in her favor, all, like you said, stood up for what Jeremy was saying in certain contexts.
Yeah, and I think that, if we think the 2 sort of camps of people on her side were, she's got all these problems, but I feel like if we can get her through this bumpy patch, maybe she'll be okay. And then the other side is, oh no, we're still going to vote her out, just not first. And she doesn't really have anybody that is really on her side. Even John, who talked about thinking well, I would like to be able to work with her. I would like to be able to work with her, as opposed to, I have formed a connection with her and we have a good alliance and we are going to be having each other's back. It's in theory, she seems like someone I could work with. As opposed to why at day 9 are you not already locking that dynamic down or not?
Right.
But yeah, so it's kind of frustrating just because, we talked a little bit last time about, okay, well, so we have someone in chat who's saying she thinks we don't like Natalie because of her race. It's pretty clear that's why you're against her. Well, I disagree. I don't think that's why. Obviously, I don't know that there's any way we could prove it, but
I didn't realize that we'd said anything that.
Nope. Cindy, in chat, I don't know if you've listened to our podcast before, but we've been doing this for a long time. It is not something that has been an issue in the past. So I don't know that you have any basis to say that, except for perhaps you liked her and you're mad that we didn't like her, so you are going there with it. I don't think we've said anything to suggest otherwise. So But I mean, I suppose it's, it's a conclusion to jump to, but I don't think it's a fair one. I hope that she starts being more open to having, alliances and connections with people, because that's what I'm not seeing from her so far. And that's what I find frustrating.
Yeah, that's
the way, so, because this is, you're saying the way you're bashing her is rude and it's inappropriate. And I want to ask specifically, what we are criticizing is that she is bossing people around and not accepting constructive criticism, and that she's very cool with her approach, which can be frustrating. But we have also acknowledged that her sort of opponent in that argument with Jeremy was also behaving irrationally. I'm not sure what we're saying, how we're saying is rude or inappropriate at all. We are watching a reality show where it is a competition, and we are judging everybody based on strategies that will help them move forward in the competition. So I think that you maybe are jumping to conclusions just because maybe you're a fan of Natalie's, and you're feeling like we are not taking her side, which is fair. I don't think we are taking her side, but I don't think it has anything to do with her race, and I don't think anything we've said is rude or inappropriate. So, you are entitled to your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair opinion. I mean, we are not in agreement with the decision to keep Natalie, but that, like I said, we don't feel like that strategically was the right thing, because she has no connections with anyone and will easily jump ship. That would be, again, the perspective of it.
And I would like to hope
on the show as somebody who creates a negative atmosphere, and that's really what what we're frustrated with.
And that's what the other players in her tribe were saying as well. That's what everybody in the show was saying about her. And so that's, the dynamic that we are responding to as well. And I would like to hope that maybe with this source of conflict with Jeremy gone, maybe that will help her to open up and connect with everybody a little bit better and form a better chemistry. Or maybe when there's the tribe mix up and it's just a different mix of people, maybe that'll all smooth things out. And I hope so. I certainly don't like rooting against people. That's not why I watch the show. I like rooting for people. So I would hope that happens. But I think as of right now, she is creating tension with the other people in her tribe. And that's not just our opinion. That's what happened in the episode we just watched.
And I feel like that's where we were in our conversation, was talking about what comes next and how do we, because we're not rooting for her to just suck and then get voted out next. Like, we're, I specifically was saying, like, I hope the fact that, like, there were a lot of people against her in this, even though she got through it, has her kind of check her attitude a little bit and start to make those connections with people, especially with the tribe mix-up. Like you said, the different mix of people. I'm rooting for her to, show us some more of that, like keeping cool under pressure. Like, those were all things we gave her commendations for. I want to see more of that. I want to see more building relationships with people.
Right.
That all those things could happen. I don't see how they are based on what we've been shown so far, but we just don't know how people respond in these situations, which is part of why we watch the show. That's the entertainment.
Yeah, I mean,
respond to the dynamic of how it changes.
Yes, that's what keeps the show interesting season after season, is that we have similar conditions with the competition and the challenges and the shelters and so on, but different combinations of people. And we've seen over and over again how a strategy that works one season might not work in the next, because it's different people. And that's what makes it a fascinating, psychological experiment, is seeing how these different strategies work with different combinations of people and the team psychology of all of that.
Right.
And what we've seen over and over again is that more often than not, the people who do well ultimately in the game do well by forming close relationships with many people. And that's what we're not seeing from Natalie. And I hope that she's able to turn that around. But I am not optimistic.
Right.
Just based on what we've seen so far.
And that's what we'll probably watch to see if we are proven wrong. As we often are. And we have many cold takes, and we're not embarrassed by them.
Yeah. So I think, we kind of talked a lot about sort of that main thrust of the episode, but let's jump back to the beginning just to kind of talk through some of the, the other things that happened. Yep. We started the episode with kind of an awkward night at the David tribe. Cindy is still in chat, I guess. So Parvati and Natalie would have been amazing. Well, yeah, maybe if the two of them were paired together, maybe they'd get along. I certainly like Parvati.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's what we're saying is that, so if what you're saying is if Parvati and Natalie had like brought out the best in each other, then yeah, I agree. Like, but I don't feel like we're seeing the best out of Natalie right now.
Right.
So yes, I totally agree. I think if that had come together and had been like a power duo like that, and it had brought out something in Natalie that we haven't seen thus far in the show, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, well, and the truth is too, we can also acknowledge that the nature of the show pushes people, right? The weather's bad. They're sleeping outside. There's not much food. There's a lot of exertion. There's a lot of boredom during the day. There's just a lot of people who are not at their best under those conditions, right? But that's part of the show, right?
It's part of the show, and also, and we talked about this an episode or two ago in our podcast, is that, the delineation of like the David and Goliath, sometimes almost gives people permission to act a certain way. And, and Natalie's not the only one on this one. Like I think there are definitely other people on that tribe who are leaning into that Goliath definition of like, well, we need to be type A's and we need to be this.
Yeah.
And maybe that's part of it. Maybe she's leaning into that aspect of it, and when it all starts to, when they break up the tribes and mix it around, yeah.
Well, and it may be too that she's feeling like, I mean, it's clear that she's not, one of the physically strongest. I mean, that's just, she's not. It's not her strength, and so maybe she's thinking of this as she wants to bring her own strengths to the tribe in her own way. And if it's not through physicality, then she has management experience. And so that is what she's attempting to do. But I think one of the telling details is what Dan said, which is she's acting like we're her employees as opposed to equal peers in a competition where we're all on the same level.
Right.
So anyway, let's jump back to the beginning as we were starting to do a moment ago. We have an awkward night at the David tribe because, of course, there was the three people who were surprised by the outcome. We have Davey, who felt really kind of betrayed because he had thought of himself as close with Nick and Christian and was frustrated that, like, he seems to be feeling like I might have been willing to do what you were planning, but you didn't tell me. You left me out of the loop. And I was a little bit frustrated that the decision seemed to be, let's throw Gabby under the bus and try to blame her for that so we don't take any heat for being flippers. And on the one hand, I can say, as a strategy, I mean, I guess I can see it, but I also feel like I like Gabby, and it kind of sucks for her to have that happen. It's not really fair either.
Yeah, it was odd, and I was curious to see how that would have played out. Being, that it didn't seem like Christian really wanted to, like, it wasn't like he was trying to, like, set her up as the next vote.
Well, Nick seemed like he was doing that, but yeah, there was even a moment with Nick.
Nick didn't, that was the confusing thing with Nick, and it goes back to, like, our initial, like, go back to the first episode when Nick was kind of, like, not on the same page with us.
Yeah.
You know, and then he got humbled, like we talked about, came back around the second episode, but now he's back in that cocky position. And he never actually says, like, he wants to set Gabby up to be the next vote. He's just so, like, convinced, like, that she's the, like, can be the fall person for, like, us flipping, but then thinks that they still get to dictate who gets voted out next because everyone's looking at Gabby. So it's like, in Nick's mind, it seemed like, you know, he wasn't setting Gabby up. He was deflecting to Gabby so they could surprise somebody else. You know, and Christian was kind of going along with it because he's like, okay, you know, this worked. Let's see how this plays out. You know, he is very, I don't want to say reactionary because it's not, you know, it's like a combination of, like, he does think ahead in strategy, but his talent seems to be in, like, taking the inputs that come in and making his decisions within them, as opposed to, like, setting out to, like, have something particular happen, at least so far. And then kind of what happened here is, like, Nick dictated this, and Christian said, all right, let's go along with it and let's kind of see how it happens. But he didn't stop being friends with Gabby. You know, he didn't, you know, he just continued. He's like, let's take it in. And so, well, I didn't want to root for them to lose. Actually, I didn't really want to root for anybody to lose the challenge because I like characters on both sides.
Yeah.
So, you know, it leaves you in this sort of, what do you want? Had they lost,
well, I was rooting for the Goliath tribe to lose just because they hadn't yet. So that's kind of where I was at. But yeah,
because part of that I think was because I was interested to see how this would have played out. Like, would Nick have, like, leaned on, like, Gabby and, like, that was actually where he was going, or was he really thinking that he could, like, pressure it all to Gabby? Because there was a scene when they were sitting on the raft or whatever, and he had kind of got everybody all spun up.
Yeah,
you almost see, like, Nick's face. It looked like he almost felt like, oh man, I got this too far. Like I'm almost setting Gabby up to be there.
It's interesting because that was kind of not my take on it.
Oh, that's what I saw. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, like, what it felt like to me was that, you know, they talked in, you know, this opening sequence briefly about how, you know, especially because some of the people who weren't in the loop are mad, we need a way to try to spin all of this in such a way as people are not, like, mad at us. And so they talked at that point about possibly throwing Gabby under the bus. And it was like the two of them. And I actually wrote boo in parentheses just because I like Gabby and I didn't think that was fair. But at the same time, I mean, you know, what's fair? It's competition, you know? So on that note, though, from there, it seemed like they had largely agreed between them that Gabby was the one to blame, but then Christian kept sort of hanging out with her and bonding with her and connecting with her. And Nick is kind of still going with the plan, but he's like, it seems like Christian is still close with her, so I hope that's not going to be a problem. That was kind of the take I had.
Yeah, I mean, that, I guess you could interpret it either way. So I guess, well, it'll be hard.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see, again, with the tribe mix-up coming up. It'll be interesting to see, like, how any of these things play out. Like, so.
But I was specifically relieved when the Davids won the challenge because I was like, I hope this gives Gabby time to, you know, steady the boat, so to speak.
Yes.
Because I really didn't want her to go. I like her, and I liked that she initiated that move last week. You know, I liked that. And I also felt like, even though I do kind of like B in general, for B to feel so betrayed is just this perfect example of people not aligned due to poor communication, right? Gabby only did what she did because B and Jessica made her feel like she wasn't in the loop. Yeah. And so there's a way, you know, so B is thinking of herself as the victim, betrayed by someone she thought was loyal, but shift the focus just a little bit. You know, it's like that eye doctor thing. Number one, number two, right? If number one is she's betrayed by someone she thought she was loyal, number two is you thought you could count on her to do whatever you told her, and then she didn't, so now you're mad.
Yeah.
So, and so, like, even though I like her in general, I feel like she was not apparently aware of what her part might have been in producing the outcome. Although to some extent, I kind of think that it's on Gabby of anyone to try to reconnect there if she plans to. You know what I mean? Gabby has to understand that the people left behind are not going to be happy with what she did, and it's really on her to try to repair that or not. But if she chooses not to, she has to live with the fact that they're mad at her and might want to vote her out as a result.
Yeah. Yeah. From the strategic standpoint of the game.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, from the social dynamics, like, yeah, it is interesting that, like, you know, B doesn't realize that there's a reaction to what you do. And again, I also, like you said, I like B also. I liked how she responded in this episode. I thought she was great. It made me think of a time when, you know, going, you know, kind of relating this to the social dynamics, is that there was a time when I had a employee who, you know, when anybody would make like a, you know, sort of small operational error when doing their work, he would screenshot it, you know, like in our system, and email it to them and copy their supervisor and say, this needs to be fixed. And didn't understand why people started resenting him.
Yeah.
You know, and I say, like, you got to understand, like, how that makes people, like, yes, they did something wrong. You're right. You are in the right in that they should have done this. But you don't understand, like, why, like, calling someone out for something they didn't. Again, you have to, like I said, like, put yourself in their shoes. Like, it's not like they were in there and they're like, oh man, I'm gonna really get him. I'm gonna make this mistake. You know, they just made a mistake. They already feel bad that they made a mistake,
right?
And then you're gonna call them out and, like, put it in front of their supervisor. Think about the reaction that your communication had.
Yeah,
that's why that happens. Like, let's come up with a different way of addressing this. Now, like what B and them did, like, they just didn't think about it. Like, they were like, oh, well, we don't need to talk to her, and then there was a reaction on the other side. You know?
Now, even though I am on Gabby's side in that particular conflict, it is perhaps true that if she was feeling anxious, she could have approached them and said, you guys don't want to talk to me, and that's making me a little bit nervous. She could have said that. But at the same time, that is a strategy in real life conflict resolution, not in a strategy game where the fact that they don't want to talk to you might be because they actually plan to vote you out.
Right, and it's difficult. Now, I'm not saying Jeremy's obviously was not the model of how to do it, because he clearly didn't do it correctly.
Yeah,
but you saw what happened when he tried to do that. Like, it's delicate.
Yeah, it's tricky. But so in any event,
dog is out.
Oh.
Daycare makes you tired on blood.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant out, like got out of the house and wasn't supposed to or something.
No, he's just like done,
Yeah.
But he went to Dayton all day and played. So.
So we did have a bit early on too with Carl feeling emotional because he really liked Jessica and he thought of her as his number one ally. But of course, we knew that was why Jessica was targeted, because she was kind of the nexus of this B, Carl, Jessica trio, right? I mean, that's why they picked her to vote for. But he's definitely having a hard time. And it seems like maybe other than now connecting to B over their shared frustration, it seems like he also kind of doesn't really have strong connections to, like, we don't see him with a strong connection to anyone else.
Correct.
Although Nick's kind of getting in there now, so we'll see what happens to that. I don't know. As opposed to Davy, who was also left out of the loop, but seems to have chosen going to Nick and Christian and saying, I wanted to be in the loop. Keep me in the loop, please. I'm not mad at you. I'm asking, include me next time.
Yep.
Let's see. We
have a lot of this, like, I want to make sure we don't just talk about things just to talk about them for their sake, especially since we're in the tribe mix-up and we've kind of covered the general consensus of the episode.
So maybe just high-level bullet points. We get more from John and his forming relationships with everybody. That seems pretty strong. I'm liking his play so far.
And that was the scenario in which he was sort of also discussed, like he had wanted to keep Natalie around, but he's also doing, a lot of other good things. Not to say that's not a good thing, but it's interesting to see that somebody who's playing so well thinks that she's an asset. So I would like to see how that plays out.
Yeah.
So.
We also had him connect with Jeremy a little bit over, like, it's kind of like the opposite of their shared experience, in the sense that, like, I feel like all I do is wrestling and you've never seen a wrestling match. But then, of course, we also had, Jeremy and Mike, and then we had Jeremy's whole bit about his dad with Alzheimer's, which was really emotional. And at the same time, that as a human being, I was definitely really moved. There was also the part of me that was saying, oh, that's not a good sign for him in the game that they're showing us this right now.
Right.
Just because sometimes when someone gets voted out, that's the episode that they get the extra screen time on.
Right, because they want us to feel bad for it.
So, question: do you know anything about John as a wrestler? Like, I don't know if you follow wrestling at all or anything like that.
I do not follow wrestling.
Yeah. I don't either. And so that's why I was just, we had the conversation with Gabby and Christian about John being the mayor of Slamtown and therefore the various logistics of Slamtown government and so on, which I thought was a fairly amusing conversation. And just from a production standpoint, I also enjoyed capturing Carl in the background, rolling his eyes through that whole thing.
Yes.
So I liked that on a couple of layers. But yeah, so we also had some of the stuff about Jeremy that we already talked about, him being kind of paranoid and kind of trying to micromanage everybody else's game.
Yep.
I
think we get to the challenge here.
Yeah, just about. Challenge time. And I noticed when I saw Lyrsa at the challenge that we hadn't seen her in the episode yet. Maybe she's in the background in some shot or anything, but we hadn't heard anything from her. It's raining so hard they can all barely see, but they all seem in good spirits. And
does a good job of like coaching that out of them too.
Yeah. But it was nice to see though. It made me feel good, as opposed to some of the times when they're in bad weather and they're all miserable. It's kind of like, it's more adventure-y, that aspect of it.
Yeah, I feel like what might have been the difference is it's probably the temperature. It's probably not. It's not cold and rainy,
Right.
and it's not super hot and rainy. Like it's warm and rainy, which is unpleasant, but it's like more tolerable. Like the other two extremes are like so miserable. The cold, especially.
Yeah.
You know? But they even talked about how like the rain came, then there was a heat wave, and then we had great weather, and then the rain came again. So it sounds like this rain is in like the great weather temperature, just rain. And I think that helps.
Yeah, I can imagine that it would.
You know, because you've been in rain when it's, you know, if it's raining and it's 75, like it sucks that it's raining, but it's not like when it's raining and it's.
It actually kind of feels nice, except that it's maybe inconvenient if you don't want to be wet at that particular moment.
You're getting wet, right? Yeah. But when it's raining in 100, it's like, oh, you're just like, you can't ever, like, your sweat never comes off you because there's nowhere to go because the air is full of water. Yeah.
Yeah. So in any event, we got the rope obstacles, and both tribes were actually pretty even getting to the puzzle. And the puzzle was Natalie and Allison versus Christian and Gabby. And the Davids pulled it out to win. And there was a little bit of discussion here and there about the idea of, like, Natalia said something about, like, Angelina should have been doing the puzzle, but I'm thinking, like, the implication, I thought, was she was saying instead of Natalie, but Natalie sat out the last challenge and so couldn't sit out this challenge. And so where else are you going to put her? Yep. So it didn't really make any sense to me to complain that she shouldn't have been doing the puzzle.
Oh, bud.
So I don't think there was really a reasonable alternative there. But in any event, we got a rare sequence with the winning tribe post-immunity challenge, where we have the David tribe happy to have won the challenge for once. Gabby is very happy to have contributed to the victory with the puzzle. And then we hear also about Bee having hurt her knee, which is unfortunate and sounds like exacerbated a prior injury. So hopefully that's not an ongoing issue. You know what I mean? But I feel like showing it to us suggests that maybe it will be.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll affect her, but she seemed to be in mostly positive spirits about like having. Oh, I think.
Yeah, maybe being a
home and really realize it because he was so out, and now he's like thinking it's like some kind of predator.
Being an MMA fighter, and especially since this is sort of a re-injury of something she injured previously, she seemed like, she's calm about it because she kind of knew all about what was going on already.
Does mean that we need to try to wrap up because I need to cook dinner.
I think we're close. So we talked about most of the rest of the episode already because it was all the stuff about Jeremy kind of, acting sketchy enough that people were actually willing to change their vote from the original plan of Natalie to Jeremy. And so that's kind of pretty much what happened. I mean, we just sort of discussed that in depth up front. So
yeah, we kind of caught it all and even tribal council, like we talked about all of it. So
so next time, Gabby's breaking point, but there's a tribe swap, so who knows what happens there.
Yeah, they didn't give us much except that it was going to be a tribe swap.
Yeah, but that's typical on when it's going to be the tribe swap. That's what they focus on. But then in the final words, somewhat predictably, Jeremy kind of says the platitude of, proud of the way he played, which I only call it a platitude because it seemed like he was saying it in sort of a preemptory way, as opposed to really thinking about it. It sounded like he said it like that's what you're supposed to say, and then proceeded to talk more about Natalie. And so to some extent, I can kind of see like maybe that's why if he's just like that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as much as I, so hey, maybe they, Natalie will prove us both wrong. But in the meantime, I still kind of feel like we'll see what the ramifications are. But in the meantime, we'll be back for more talking about Survivor next week. And if you want to join in the chat, you can when we're watching live, just like Cindy did, even though we didn't agree with her assessment. But, you're welcome to comment.
We did engage in the conversation, though. So,
yes.
Yeah.
So thanks for everybody for watching and or listening, and we'll be back next week to talk about Survivor.
All right. Bye.